There are still too many Republicans in Congress who have refused to listen to the voices of reason and compromise that are coming from outside of Washington. They continue to insist on protecting the $100 billion worth of tax cuts for the wealthiest 2% of Americans at any cost, even if it means reducing the deficit with deep cuts to things like education and medical research, even if it means deep cuts in Medicare.
That was President Obama last night, taking House Republicans over his knee a bit to give them a spanking for not going along with a compromise plan on the debt ceiling super committee. And this is Power Play. I'm Chris Stirewalt, Internet, and thank you very much for stopping by Studio 3 on this rainy and somewhat bleak feeling day in Washington. And I look forward to having our spirits brighten today. So let's hear from Ford O'Connell. He's a former McCain-Palin presidential campaign advisor, and he's the chairman of Civic Forum PAC. And Debbie Dingell, she is a Democratic strategist. She is the president of D2 Strategies. And we should point out, of course, that you are married to the dean of the Democratic House delegation, Jon Dingell.
That's all true.
Have I introduced you all correctly and appropriately?
Yes.
And I should point out, red team, blue team. That's generally how we've got everybody in their lane. So the mood in Washington today is crummy because the super committee that for some reason people thought would work, which I have no idea why anybody thought this would work, didn't work, and it absolutely pooped out. And let me just put out my foolish, crazy theory, which is everybody got what they wanted. The Republicans got the last tranche of the debt ceiling increase done tied only to cuts. There were no tax increases anywhere in it. And when these automatic cuts theoretically start happening in 13 months, the Republicans will have won out on this question. The president got what he wanted because what he wants to do is run against a Republican Party that is intransigently fixed on protecting the millionaires and billionaires from any tax increase, even if it means helping the American people. Do I have that about right?
I think that's about right.
Oh, look at me. All right. Okay. I'm cheering up already. Debbie, what do you think?
I think there's an element of that you're right. I think that at some point, after what happened in August and what happened to the stock market, global confidence in the American economy, people understood the potential very negative consequences of what did happen in the last 24 hours. I think what you said is true, that I think President Obama wants to run against a Congress that has not been successful, and I think Republicans are trying to make a point. I don't think that between now and next November it's going to be that simple, because there are going to be consequences, and the American people are going to be fed up, and our economy is going to suffer for what happened yesterday.
I do agree with you, and for that reason, I think that the Republicans have to get out in front of this. They're going to have to get out and explain their position, and they're going to have to explain that raising taxes without cutting any more spending is not really the way to go right now, because we have a spending problem, and taxing is just not going to fix it. But that said, they do have to get out there and explain it, because I think the American people right now are hurting, and I think they want to know the reasons why the Republicans did what they did. And on top of that, if the Republicans really want to go a step further, they're going to have to make sure that they win the Senate in 2012, because essentially there is no guarantee that President Obama is going to lose. And if they want to put forth bold leadership, they're going to have to do it through Congress.
I've never seen a stakes in a game as high as are shaping up for this 2012 election. I have seen big elections. I have seen very consequential elections that people said this is the most important election in history, and I always thought that they were sort of blowing smoke. But the decision essentially of both parties to push pause on the process in August and say we're going to fight this out in November is setting this up for an incredibly consequential clash of two very different ideas. Is there any more middle left in American politics, Debbie?
I think that's one of the problems. I think I actually am one of those people that believes that there are a lot of people, that silent majority that we used to talk about, that are there in the middle. We have extremists on both sides. They're the ones that are vocal. They're the ones that are impacting the process. Money on both sides of those two extremes is dominating the process. But I think at some point, American people are getting fed up. I still can't tell you what kind of election this is going to be. Normally I can begin to make a prediction. I don't know what's going to, I don't know if it's going to be a Tea Party year or Wall Street year, or people are saying, I want leadership. There's a dearth of it. Give me a leader.
Now, there's a question. It's interesting. President Obama has I guess appropriately for him, an audacious reelection strategy, and that is to be an incumbent and run against Washington, and to be a Democrat that says we need a Washington that works and is more consequential in your life at a time that he also says Washington has so deeply failed. Now, it's a fairly, I mean, I've not seen anybody make that argument, especially when you hang a tax increase in the background, that you have sort of a triple loop that Democrats have to make on this, where they say we need a tax increase to pay for the government jobs and the infrastructural improvements that are necessary to move the country ahead. Washington is broken, and it's the Republicans' fault. So that's a lot of acrobatics. Do you think, though, that the Republicans can come up with a simpler response that will resonate with voters?
They're going to have to. I mean, there's no way that they're going to be able to defeat President Obama unless they can show that he's not being a good faith actor. So what they're going to have to do in Congress, particularly the House Republicans, is start offering solutions. Doesn't matter whether or not the president accepts them, but they have to get out there constantly and saying, we're doing our job. This is a divided government. American people, please pay attention, because right now this cannot continue. I'm going to be honest with you. This could very well be the most important election of my lifetime.
It is.
Just because of the way, the two different economic views that are going on between a welfare state and free enterprise.
Well, and Debbie, I wrote this morning that in many ways this is a moral issue for the sides here, not just the old-fashioned horse trading in the middle over getting a budget done that you would have seen in a previous political era. But Democrats think it would be immoral to cut any more spending without raising taxes on rich people, and Republicans think it would be immoral if you were to take any more money from people who work for a living for a government that they think spends too profligately.
I do think there are a lot of moral issues involved in there. I think that I'm not sure that it totally breaks down as simply as you put it. I mean, what is our responsibility to a community? What is the the support network we need to provide to all Americans? How do you encourage all Americans to work? How do you provide them opportunity? What is equal opportunity? I think that Republicans are losing on the tax issue in one sense, that not everybody agrees. I mean, I think the majority of people agree that 1% could be paying more. But I think a lot of people aren't happy with the pitting of the executive branch versus the Congress, which, by the way, I don't think is against a Republican Congress.
Right.
I think it's an executive branch against a Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people want to see them work together to find answers to fix the future.
All right. Now, we are looking forward to, I should say, we are now dreading that a year from now, whatever happens in this election, we are going to have so much dangling over our heads. We will have this sword of Damocles hanging over our heads for Congress, because the current tax rates, probably the funding of the government, because at best we'll be limping by on continuing resolutions from now till then, the start of about $50 or $55 billion a year in defense cuts. You'll have all of that stuff and the alternative minimum tax, I believe, all waiting for January 1 and hanging out there. So whoever wins is going to have to sprint back to Washington as quickly as possible and try to do some very serious legislative heavy lifting. Do you see a circumstance where they fail and we sort of end up with a 20-car pileup on January 1st, 2013?
Well, at the rate Congress is going, we can always fail. That's why I think the Republicans need to be putting those plans in place now. They need to start touting those plans, because the best way to win re-election is to actually show a plan, not to discuss things like hope and change, to actually show that Washington can work. Because right now, America is unhappy because they want jobs, but right now Congress is just not going to do it, because we just have two different views on how that end goal should be reached. And I think that that's where we are. And unfortunately, the American people just don't care, because they're hungering for leadership and they're hungering for a better economy.
Last thing, Debbie, the hatred for Washington as it grows more and more intense, and I should always point out I live in Virginia. I'm not part of this, but as the hatred
I live in Michigan too.
Yeah, exactly. As the hatred for Washington grows more and more, does it make the president's task more difficult? Because if you had to pick one label, libertarians seem to be doing better with the "we hate the government" attitude. Does that make the president's job more difficult?
I think everybody who's running for election has a tough job. I think people are going to be holding the president accountable. I think 2 years ago, Republicans were successful because they didn't have to put forward solutions. I think people are saying, hey, you got to do more than just say, I'm not going to do something. I think it's going to be very challenging this next year to see how all sides start to define their issue. And while 9% approval of Congress right now, how does that translate back home? How do people feel about their individual?
Okay, wait, hold on. I'm sure it's very good, and we will make time for it. I promise. But we've got to take a quick break, because when we come back, we're going to talk about the Republicans are going to have a presidential debate tonight on foreign policy. We're going to find out how this is going to work and who's got what at stake as this goes down. So put in the chat right now. Go there right now. You're already on the computer. Just go into the chat right now and tell us who's got the foreign policy chops inside the Republican field. Whose foreign policy position, even if you don't plan to vote for them, whose foreign policy position do you like most? You can put it in the chat, or you can hit me on Lowe's Twitter at C. Stirewalt. It will be loads of fun, I promise. So stick around.
I would not spend a lot of time waiting for the UN. I will tell you that my position on the UN is, if they continue to go around as the Palestinian state tried to do, that we need to sit down as a country and have a conversation about, is the continued funding of the United Nations in the best interest of America.
That was not a scene from Walking Tall. That was Texas Governor Rick Perry in the center seat on Special Report with Bret Baier last night, when Bill Kristol and Charles Krauthammer were after him on the question of whether or not he'd impose a no-fly zone over Syria. This is Power Play. Welcome back, Internet. We're having a fantastically good time with Ford O'Connell and Debbie Dingell, RB. But they both love America. We've already stipulated that. That's on the book, so we've got that going for us. All right, now before we get to our esteemed panel, I want to share with you. Kevin Dunlap says this about Newt. I think it's funny. He says Obama's mouth is writing checks his brain can't cash, and now he's tried to rewrite government to his need. Newt gets America. Newt gets America's role in the world. So he likes Newt Gingrich because he thinks Newt gets America's role in the world. But a challenge for the former speaker is that, as Carl points out, he has a lot of ideas, and Republicans may trust him viscerally about that he gets America's role in the world, as Kevin Dunlap says, but he has articulated that in various ways, whether it's on Libya, Afghanistan, all of that stuff. What is, Ford, you know these Republicans very well, what does Gingrich need to say tonight on foreign policy issues?
Well, I think the top issue is going to be defense spending, thanks to the Super Committee.
Oh, right.
And one of the big things that Newt Gingrich has going for him besides foreign policy is enthusiasm. That was something else that Carl didn't mention that is really getting him up there. Remember here, Barack Obama's top point in the Gallup job approval poll, besides likability, is his understanding of foreign policy. And frankly, Newt Gingrich's totality of the circumstances approach seems to be resonating with Republican voters, because they don't want to see an isolationist, but they also want somebody to be perceived as an international cowboy.
Right.
And for some reason, that is actually resonating with folks, and I think he's going to have to boil that down to more of a 7 to 8 second soundbite on sort of where he stands. That's the key. But I'll tell you something right now, a lot of the other candidates, if they really go in there and try to hit Newt on foreign policy, they might get sucker punched and find themselves falling in the polls.
He does like to do that, doesn't he? And Debbie, real quick before we go, what's popular in the Republican primary process may not be popular in the general. Hawkish stance is popular in the Republican primary process, but in the general, people by and large seem to be very tired of the forward strategy of freedom as embraced by George W. Bush and Barack Obama.
I think people are terrified of another war. At the same time, Homeland Security and terrorism remains front and center. It's very complicated. I think Newt Gingrich is probably one of the brightest people I know. His intellectual capacity gets him in trouble a lot of the time.
He outsmarts himself. He outsmarts himself. Okay, well, we'll see about that tonight. Now, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, here's a topic that you didn't think we were going to talk about, the health of international banks and the banks in the United States. But it has some potential political consequences you may not have thought of, Internet. So keep your chat coming in on foreign policy and which candidates got the right approach. And stick around.
Jon Corzine helped craft the Republic. It's not coincidental that the things he did here turn out to be the exact same things the Recovery Act has. Because way back in the transition period, before we were sworn in, when Barack Obama and I were literally sitting at a desk in a high-rise in Chicago, beginning to plan how we would try to get this economy out of a ditch. Literally, the first guy I called was Jon Corzine. Not a joke. Not a joke. Because first of all, he's the smartest guy that I know in terms of the economy and on finance. I really mean this.
That was Vice President Joe Biden in a May 7th, 2009 campaign speech for then New Jersey Governor Jon Corzine, in words that I'm sure he wish he could get back in the teleprompter. And this is Power Play, and we are joined still by Ford O'Connell and Debbie Dingell. We are very grateful to you people for shepherding us through this process, and we're going to talk about Jon Corzine and the 1.2 billion American dollars that are missing from the investment firm that he had and all of that good stuff later on. We're going to get to more of your chats, but I want you to be illuminated, Internet. I want you to know something very important. I want you to know what Peter Barnes has to tell you about the health of America's banks right now, because it could matter a great deal to you. Brother Barnes, welcome back to Los Power Play. So here's what happened, guys. Jon Corzine was one of the rising stars inside the Democratic Party, lost a surprise election to Chris Christie in 2009. Now it turns out that his post-political career predicated on a large fund based on European debt has gone south, and then there's $1.2 trillion that nobody can seem to lay their hands on. It's starting to actually look like a scam.
Chris.
1.2 billion. Peter Barnes, fact check. But it's a lot of money, even at 1.2 billion. Are there political legs to this, Debbie Dingell? What do you think?
Well, I suspect that there are political legs. There are a lot of people that are still angry. I'm one of them. Perhaps somebody I knew in a very nonpartisan way warned about what was going to happen when Glass-Steagall was repealed a number of years ago. We need to have accountability. What has happened here is wrong. Banks are making all of this money, but are they investing? Are we seeing the investments? Are we seeing the credit being extended out there to help the recovery? No, I think that it's an outrage that we're starting to see these big bonuses with banks again, when we're not seeing what needs to happen with the American economy recovery. And I think what we need to see some real accountability with what we're witnessing in these investment banks across the country.
Ford, what do you say? Is Jon Corzine cylinder-sized liability, or
that's
just
a different issue?
No.
Compare those
I'm not saying it's the same thing, Debbie. I'm just saying that in terms of a scandal that hangs on and continues to be around.
Absolutely, because you wonder where the White House is getting its advice. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought they were considering actually bringing him closer to the White House, and given where we are economically, that would be a little bit scary, particularly after Solyndra now, this, and other various like Light Square, that we really have to think about where is the White House getting its economic advice in terms of ensuring confidence that we're going to get out of this economic downturn. To your point, I do agree with you about accountability, because we cannot afford another bailout.
Well, and I would actually say Wall Street is giving advice to both parties,
sure,
Republican and Democrat.
Right.
So I don't think that you can differentiate who's giving the advice.
Everybody rides that trolley.
Correct.
Okay, let's give the last word to Peter Barnes.